A frozen bobcat appears at a fire station, and what the firefighters did will melt your heart. On the coldest night of the year, a wild predator collapses at their door, half dead, desperate, and dangerous. Some see a threat, others see a chance to save a life. But as the storm rages, a hidden truth emerges. This animal didn't just stumble into town, it was running from something far darker. The firehouse that should be a place of safety soon becomes a battlefield, where loyalty is tested, secrets ignite, and one choice could mean life or death. What did they discover that night? And when everything is on the line, who will have the courage to protect what cannot protect itself? Before we dive in, drop a quick hello in the comments. Maybe your name, maybe your city. Every reply reminds me this isn't just my voice, but our space. The January wind howled outside Ashbrook Fire Station, its fierce gusts rattling the windows like angry fists. Chief Roland Mercer walked through the quiet engine bay, his boots echoing against the concrete floor as he performed his nightly inspection. At 58 years old, he had seen enough winters to know this one was particularly brutal. He paused by engine 3, running his weathered hand along its freshly polished surface. The storm had kept them busy all day with minor accidents and frozen pipes. But now an uneasy stillness had settled over the station, the kind of stillness that usually preceded trouble. A sudden thump against the bay doors made Roland freeze. He turned, squinting through the frost-covered windows into the swirling snow beyond. Another thump, weaker this time, followed by a sound that wasn't quite a meow and wasn't quite a growl. Roland reached for the door, control, and as the massive bay door slowly rose, his breath caught in his throat. There, collapsed in a heap of spotted fur and ice, lay a bobcat, its sides heaved with labored breathing, and dark spots that looked suspiciously like blood matted its winter coat. "Chief." Eli Drummond's voice rang out as the rookie firefighter emerged from the day room. The young man's eyes widened at the sight of the wild animal. Instead of backing away, he moved closer, his face filled with concern. The commotion drew others from within the station. Deputy Captain Hayes pushed his way to the front, his jaw set in a hard line. "That's a wild animal," he said, his voice sharp with authority. "A predator. We need to put it down before it becomes a threat." Eli spun around, his usually gentle features hardening. "We can't just kill it. Look at it, it's hurt and freezing. It came to us for help. It came here because it's desperate," Hayes countered, taking a step forward. "Desperate animals are dangerous animals." Roland watched the exchange, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on his shoulders. The bobcat's eyes met his. They were glazed with pain but still alert, still fighting. Something in that gaze stirred a memory he'd rather forget, of another winter night when he'd had to make a hard call. "Chief," Eli pleaded, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Please, we're supposed to help those in need, even if they're not human," Hayes scoffed. "This isn't a lost kitten, Drummond. This is a wild animal that could tear someone's throat out." The other firefighters murmured among themselves, some nodding with Hayes, others looking uncertain. Roland could feel the tension building, like pressure in a fire hose. After what felt like an eternity, Roland spoke, his voice gruff but firm. "Get the animal into storage room B, use the rescue blankets, and wear protective gear. Nobody goes in alone." He turned to face Hayes, whose face had darkened with disapproval. "We'll call animal rescue in the morning. Until then, we keep it contained and monitored." "This is a mistake," Hayes said, his words carrying a hint of threat. "When this goes wrong, it's on your head." Eli was already moving, gathering blankets and thick gloves. His face shone with relief and something else. Vindication, maybe, or pride in standing up for what he believed was right. The next 30 minutes were tense. As they carefully moved the injured bobcat, it barely struggled, a fact that worried Roland more than if it had fought them. He watched as Eli gently guided the animal into the storage room, speaking to it in soft, soothing tones that seemed to calm both the bobcat and the nervous firefighters around him. Once the bobcat was secured, Roland called the crew together in the day room. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. He could see it in the way Hayes stood apart from the others, in the worried glances some crew members exchanged, in the determined set of Eli's shoulders. "I know some of you disagree with this decision," Roland said, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "but we're firefighters. We don't turn away from those who need help, even when that help comes with risk. We'll handle this situation like we handle everything else, with caution, professionalism, and teamwork." Hayes pushed off from the wall he'd been leaning against. "And when that thing attacks someone? What then, Chief? Will your conscience be clear?" "That's enough, Hayes," Roland snapped, feeling his patience wear thin. The deputy captain's challenge hung in the air, heavy with insubordination. Eli stood up, his young face serious. "I'll take responsibility for monitoring it tonight, Chief. I'll stay with it." Roland nodded, noting how the rookie's offer seemed to ease some of the tension in the room, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change things. At Station 8, for better or worse, the bobcat's arrival had already drawn lines between his crew that he wasn't sure could be easily erased. In the dim light of storage room B, Eli Drummond knelt beside the injured bobcat. The room's silence, was broken only by the animal's labored breathing and the distant howl of wind outside. He had waited until the other firefighters were occupied with their evening routines before slipping inside. Armed with extra blankets and a shallow bowl of water, the Bobcat lay still, its eyes half closed. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, its usually magnificent coat looked dull and matted. Eli's heart ached at the sight. Moving slowly, he spread another thick blanket over the animal's trembling form. "Easy there," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm just trying to help." The Bobcat's ears twitched at his voice, but it remained motionless. Eli took this as a sign to continue. With gentle movements, he positioned the water bowl near its muzzle. The animal's tongue darted out weakly, lapping at the liquid dot. As Eli adjusted the blanket, his hand brushed against something sticky on the Bobcat's fur. Frowning, he leaned closer, carefully parting the matted coat. His breath caught in his throat. Long, angry lacerations crossed the animal's back, partially hidden by its fur. These weren't random scratches from tree branches or fence wire. They were deliberate, uniform cuts. "Someone did this to you," he murmured, anger rising in his chest. "You weren't just running from the cold, were you?" The storage room door creaked open. Eli straightened up quickly as Chief Roland Mercer's imposing figure filled the doorway. "Drummond." Roland's voice was low and warning. "What are you doing in here alone?" Eli stood his ground. "Chief, you need to see this. These wounds there, not natural. Something's wrong here." Roland stepped inside, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. He crossed his arms, looking down at the Bobcat with a mixture of concern and resignation. "What I see is a rookie getting too invested in a situation that isn't our problem. But Chief, the other firefighters are already questioning my judgment about keeping it here." Roland cut him off. "Hayes is right about one thing. This isn't a stray cat we can nurse back to health. It's a wild animal, and wild animals are unpredictable." Eli gestured to the injuries. "Someone attacked this Bobcat. These cuts are too precise to be accidents. It didn't just wander down from the mountains. It was running from something." Roland's weathered face hardened. "Don't go creating mysteries where there aren't any. Drummond, animal rescue will be here in the morning. Until then, follow protocol. No one enters this room alone. That's an order. With all due respect, sir." Eli stood straighter, meeting his chief's stern gaze. "Sometimes protocol isn't enough. Sometimes we have to listen to our instincts." "Your instincts." Roland's voice took on an edge. "Your instincts could get you killed. This isn't about saving kittens from trees. That animal could turn on you in a heartbeat." The Bobcat stirred slightly, a soft whimper escaping its throat. Eli immediately turned his attention back to it, his face softening with concern. Roland watched the interaction, his expression unreadable. "Don't get attached, Drummond," Roland said finally, his tone gentler but still firm. "I mean it. This isn't going to end the way you want it to." After Roland left, Eli sank back down beside the Bobcat. The animal's eyes opened slightly, meeting his gaze. In those wild yellow eyes, Eli saw something that transcended the usual barrier between human and beast, a desperate plea for help. "I don't care what they say," he whispered, carefully adjusting the blanket around the Bobcat's shoulders. "Something wrong happened to you, and I'm going to figure out what it was." The night shift continued around them, with firefighters passing by the storage room window, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others watching with curiosity. Eli remained at his post, torn between his duty to follow orders and his growing conviction that there was more to this situation than anyone realized. The Bobcat's wounds told a story of cruelty that didn't match any natural explanation. As Eli sat in the quiet room, listening to the storm outside and the soft breathing of the injured animal beside him, he felt the comfortable certainties of his job beginning to shift. For the first time since joining the department, he found himself questioning where the line should be, drawn between following protocol and following his conscience. The wind howled louder outside, rattling the station's windows. Inside storage room B, Eli Drummond kept his vigil, knowing that something had changed fundamentally in the firehouse tonight. The boundaries between duty and compassion had become blurred, and he was no longer sure which path was the right one to follow. The snowstorm intensified as night deepened, howling winds battering the firehouse with increasing fury. Inside the dispatch room, the emergency radio crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. Multiple emergencies reported across Ashbrook, the dispatcher's voice cut through static. Power outages affecting Sunset Grove Nursing Home. Family, stranded on Mountain Pass Road. All units respond. Chief Roland Mercer's weathered face hardened as he grabbed the radio. Engine 3 responding. What's the status at Sunset Grove? No heat, Chief. 200 elderly residents at risk. Temperature dropping fast? Roland turned to his crew, who were already pulling on their gear. Hayes, take Johnson and Martinez to the stranded vehicle. The rest of you, we're heading to Sunset Grove. Eli Drummond zipped up his turnout coat, casting a worried glance toward storage room B where the injured Bobcat lay. Deputy Captain Hayes caught his look and snorted. "Focus, rookie," Hayes sneered. "Or are you too busy playing veterinarian to do your actual job?" Roland's voice cut through the tension. "Enough. Lives are at stake. Move out. Now." The firefighters, split into teams, engines roaring to life in the bitter cold. As Eli climbed aboard, Roland fixed him with a stern look. That animal is not our priority. Drummond? Clear. Yes, sir, Eli replied, but his mind was already working out how he could check on the Bobcat between calls. At Sunset Grove, chaos greeted them. The massive building loomed dark and cold, its elderly residents huddled in blankets in the common areas. Staff members rushed about with flashlights, their faces tight with worry. Generators dead, the facility director reported. We need to evacuate the critical care wing first. Roland took command, directing his team with practiced efficiency. Peterson, get those emergency lights set up. Martinez, help staff identify priority patients. Drummond, start moving people to the heated buses. For hours, they worked tirelessly. Eli helped escort frail residents through darkened hallways, offering reassuring words as he guided them to safety. Between trips, he caught snippets of radio chatter about Hayes' team rescuing the stranded family on Mountain Pass Road. During a brief lull, while waiting for another bus to arrive, Eli seized his chance. He radioed in a quick bathroom break and sprinted back to the firehouse 2 blocks away. Inside storage room B, the Bobcat lay motionless under its blankets. Hey there, he whispered, quickly checking its water bowl and adjusting the blankets. The animal's eyes flickered open, meeting his gaze with surprising clarity. Hang in there, I'll be back soon, Drummond. Rollins' voice boomed from his radio. Where are you coming, Chief? Eli called back, hurrying from the room. The night wore on, bringing more calls as the storm wreaked havoc across town. A downed power line here, a carbon monoxide alarm there. Through it all, Eli found moments, mere minutes, to check on the Bobcat. Each time, he felt Hayes' suspicious glares following him. During one such moment, Hayes confronted him in the station's corridor. You're going to get someone killed with your divided attention. Rookie, this isn't some animal shelter, it's a firehouse. Maybe you don't belong here. Eli stood his ground, though his heart pounded. I can do both. Caring about one life doesn't mean I care less about others. Tell that to the chief, Hayes spat. He's been doing this job longer than you've been alive. He knows what matters. Back at Sunset Grove, as they finished the evacuation, Eli caught Roland watching him with a mix of frustration and something else, perhaps understanding. The chief pulled him aside as they packed up their gear. I know what you've been doing, Roland said quietly, running back to check on that animal. Eli straightened his shoulders, prepared for discipline. I haven't let it interfere with my duties, sir. No, Roland agreed, surprising him. You haven't. But this can't continue. You need to understand, in our line of work, we can't save everything. Sometimes we have to make hard choices. With respect, Chief Eli replied, maybe those choices don't always have to be as hard as we make them. The radio crackled again before Roland could respond. Another call, another emergency. As they climbed back into the engine, Eli caught Hayes shaking his head in disgust. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and neither did the emergencies. But Eli remained resolute, balancing his duties with his secret mission of mercy. In his heart, he knew Hayes was wrong. Compassion wasn't weakness. It was the very reason he'd become a firefighter in the first place. As their engine rolled through the snow-covered streets, Eli thought of the wounded Bobcat waiting in the darkness. Of Storage Room B, he might not be able to save every life that needed saving, but he was determined to save this one, no matter what it cost him. The emergency call came just before midnight. An abandoned cabin on Willow Creek Road was burning, orange flames visible against the dark winter sky. As Engine 3 raced through the snowy streets, Chief Roland Mercer gripped the dashboard, his eyes fixed on the glow in the distance. Looks like a big one, he said, his breath frosting in the cold cab. The old cabin appeared through the falling snow, flames licking up its wooden walls. The structure stood alone at the edge of the forest, half hidden by towering pines. Eli Drummond felt an odd chill that had nothing to do with the temperature as they pulled up to the scene. Hayes, take the north side. Drummond, with me on the south, Roland ordered, his voice carrying over the crackle of flames. Watch your step. This place has been abandoned for years. The firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, dragging hoses through knee-deep snow. The winter wind whipped embers into the night sky as they attacked the blaze from multiple angles. Steam hissed where water met fire, creating an eerie fog that drifted between the trees. It took them nearly an hour to get the fire under control. As the flames died down, Roland led a team inside to check for hot spots and assess the damage. Their flashlight beams cut through the smoky darkness, revealing the cabin's grim secrets. Chief, Eli called out, his voice tight. You need to see this. In what had once been the cabin's main room, metal traps lay scattered across the floor. Some were still set, their steel teeth gleaming wickedly in the flashlight beam. Fuel cans lined one wall, and a heavy workbench held tools that made Eli's stomach turn. There's more. Another firefighter shouted from the back room. You're not going to like it. Roland followed the voice, his boots crunching on debris. The beam of his flashlight swept across what looked like a makeshift processing area. Bloodstained tarps covered the floor. In one corner, a pile of animal remains told a story of systematic cruelty. Poachers, Roland said, the word coming out like a curse. They've been using this place as a base. Eli's mind went immediately to the wounded bobcat back at the station. The cuts on its back, he said. Chief, this is where it came from. It must have escaped from here. Roland nodded slowly, his weathered face grim in the flashlight's glow. Makes sense. We're only 3 miles from the station. He turned to survey the gruesome scene again, then froze. Deputy Hayes stood in the doorway, his face pale and tense. Hayes, Roland called out. You all right? Hayes startled slightly, then straightened his shoulders. Fine, Chief. Just wasn't expecting this. Roland watched his deputy carefully, noting the way Hayes's eyes darted around the room, how his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Something about the man's reaction felt off, but Roland kept his thoughts to himself. Let's finish up. Here, Roland ordered. Martinez, call the police. They'll want to document everything. As they completed their sweep of the cabin, the crew worked in tense silence. The discovery had changed something, turned their simple rescue of a wounded animal into something darker. This wasn't just about a bobcat anymore. This was about organized crime happening right in their backyard. Loading up the engine for the return trip, Eli caught Hayes making a phone call, his voice too low to hear. When Hayes noticed him watching, he quickly ended the call and pocketed his phone, avoiding eye contact. The ride back to the station was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Roland kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Hayes, who sat rigid in his seat, staring straight ahead. Eli found himself thinking about the bobcat, understanding now why it had chosen their firehouse as its sanctuary. It hadn't just been running from the cold, it had been running for its life. As they backed the engine into the bay, Roland gathered his crew. What we found tonight stays between us until the police complete their investigation. Clear. Everyone nodded, but the air in the station felt different now. The danger they'd sensed vaguely before had taken solid form. Someone was out there, someone cruel enough to torture animals for profit, someone who might not appreciate their operation being discovered. Eli made his way to storage room B, needing to check on their wounded guest. The bobcat lifted its head as he entered, those wild eyes somehow more knowing now. So that's your story, he whispered, kneeling beside the animal. Don't worry, you're safe here. But as he spoke the words, Eli wasn't entirely sure they were true. He thought about Hayes' strange behavior at the cabin, the furtive phone call, the way the deputy had been so eager to have the bobcat put down from the start. Something wasn't right, and for the first time since the bobcat had collapsed at their door, Eli felt truly afraid. In the dim light of storage room B, Eli gently cleaned the bobcat's wounds with warm water. His hands moved with careful precision, revealing more evidence of the violence the animal had endured. Deep cuts crossed its back, telling a story of desperate escape from those cruel metal traps they'd found at the cabin. You're living proof of what they did, he whispered, dabbing antiseptic on a particularly nasty gash. No wonder you ran so far to find help. The bobcat's eyes, though still clouded with pain, seemed more alert now. It watched Eli's every move but no longer flinched at his touch. Instead, it lay still, as if understanding that this human meant safety rather than harm. Down the hall, Chief Roland Mercer stood at his office window, staring out at the falling snow. The discovery at the cabin had shaken his certainty about many things, including his initial judgment of Eli's compassion for the wounded animal. The rookie's instincts about the bobcat being more than just a stranded creature had proven right. Now Roland wondered what else he might have misjudged. His thoughts were interrupted by heavy footsteps. Deputy Hayes entered without knocking, his face tight with barely contained tension. Chief, we need to talk about the situation, Hayes said, closing the door behind him. That animal in there, it's becoming a liability. Roland turned from the window, studying his deputy's face. How so? People like those poachers, they don't appreciate witnesses, Hayes said, pacing the small office. Even four-legged ones. Having it here could bring trouble, none of us want. Sounds like you know something about these people. Mark, Roland said carefully, noting how Hayes's hands trembled slightly. Hayes stopped pacing, his shoulders stiffening. I know their type, that's all. They're dangerous. We should let animal control handle this, get it out of our house before he caught himself. But not before. Roland heard the edge of fear in his voice. Before what? Before someone gets hurt, Hayes finished. But his eyes wouldn't meet Roland's. The chief moved to his desk, settling into his chair with deliberate slowness. We're firefighters, Mark. Getting hurt comes with the job, but turning our backs on something that needs our help, that's not who we are. Hayes's face darkened. Maybe that's who you are, Chief. Maybe that's who the kid is. But some of us prefer to keep our noses out of other people's business. He turned and yanked the door open, pausing in the doorway. Just remember, I warned you. The threat in those words hung in the air long after Hayes's footsteps faded down the hall. Roland sat in his quiet office, pieces of an uncomfortable puzzle starting to align in his mind. Hayes's strange behavior at the cabin, his insistence on destroying the bobcat from the start. This warning now something wasn't right with his deputy. Back in storage room B, Eli had finished tending to the bobcat's wounds. He sat cross-legged on the floor, speaking softly to the animal as it dozed on its makeshift bed of blankets. "You're not just a bobcat anymore," he told it. "You're proof that something terrible is happening in our mountains, but we're going to make it right." The animal's ear twitched at his words, and Eli smiled. "I promise you that much. Whatever happens, I won't let anyone hurt you again." The door creaked open, and Eli looked up to find Chief Mercer standing there. The older man's face was troubled as he watched the bobcat sleeping peacefully under Eli's guard. "How is it doing?" Roland asked, his voice unusually gentle. "Better," Eli replied. "The wounds are starting to heal." "Chief, about the cabin," Roland held up a hand. "You were right, Drummond. From the beginning, you saw what this was about. I should have listened sooner." Eli stood slowly, careful not to disturb the sleeping animal. "Something's wrong with Hayes, isn't it? The way he acted at the cabin. And now he's warning me about trouble coming our way," Roland finished. "Yeah, something's very wrong. Keep a close eye on our friend here." And he paused, meeting the younger man's gaze. "Watch your back." Eli nodded, understanding the weight of his chief's warning. As Roland left, Eli returned to his vigil beside the bobcat. The animal's sides rose and fell with steady breaths, each one a silent testimony to its will to survive. In its presence, Eli felt his own determination strengthen. This wasn't just about saving one life anymore. It was about standing up against cruelty, about doing what was right even when it was dangerous. The bobcat stirred in its sleep, and Eli placed a gentle hand on its side, feeling the strong heartbeat beneath his palm. "We're in this together now," he whispered, as snow continued to fall outside and somewhere in the darkness, hidden dangers drew closer to their door. Deputy Hayes pulled his truck onto the secluded Forest Service road, his headlights cutting through the darkness. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. The choice he was about to make felt heavy in his chest, but he saw no other way out. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "This better be important." Mark Hayes swallowed hard. "Jack, it's about that bobcat you were hunting up by Miller's Ridge, the one that got away." His brother's voice sharpened. "What about it?" "It's alive. At the station." Hayes closed his eyes, forcing the words out. "Drummond, this rookie firefighter, he's been keeping it hidden in storage room, be nursing it back to health." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Hayes checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "That cat saw everything. If someone starts asking questions about those wounds, I know," Hayes said. "I tried to convince them to put it down when it first showed up, but the kid wouldn't hear of it, even got the chief to agree to keep it." The chief. Jack's laugh was harsh. Old Roland Mercer getting soft in his age. "Well, this changes things. That animal's evidence, Mark. Evidence we can't afford to leave lying around." Hayes felt sick to his stomach, but he pressed on. "What are you going to do?" "Don't worry about that. Just make sure the back door is unlocked tomorrow night. And Mark," Jack's voice hardened, "don't get in our way." The call ended, leaving Hayes alone with what he'd done. He sat in his truck for a long time, watching snowflakes dance in his headlights, before finally heading back to the station. Inside, Chief Roland Mercer watched through his office window as Hayes' truck pulled into the parking lot. About his deputy's behavior had been off ever since they'd found that cabin. The way he'd reacted to the evidence of poaching, his insistence about getting rid of the bobcat, and now these late-night disappearances. Roland rubbed his tired eyes. 25 years of firefighting had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming that Hayes was involved in something dangerous. But suspicion wasn't proof, and he couldn't act without evidence. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew his attention. Eli Drummond appeared in his doorway, looking determined. "Chief, we need to talk about the bobcat," Eli said, stepping into the office. "I've been doing research. There is a wildlife rehabilitation center just 2 hours away. They have experts who specialize in treating injured predators. If we called them, no outside calls." Roland cut him off. "Not yet. But, Chief, they could help. They'd know how to document the wounds properly, maybe even trace them back to." I said no, Drummond. Roland's voice was firm. "This station has enough to handle with the storm. We can't compromise our operations by turning this place into a circus of wildlife experts and reporters." Eli's face flushed with frustration. "This isn't just about one injured animal anymore. You saw that cabin? You know what's happening in these mountains? If we don't do something, we're firefighters." Roland interrupted. "Our job is to save lives and protect this community. It's not to play detective or wildlife ranger." "Saving lives is exactly what we're doing," Eli insisted. "That bobcat is evidence of organized crime in our jurisdiction. We have a responsibility." "Enough." Roland's hands slammed down on his desk. "The answer is no. For now, we keep this in-house. That's an order." Drummond. Eli's jaw clenched, but he nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." He turned and left the office, his back rigid with barely contained disagreement. Roland watched him go, then turned back to his window. Hayes was still sitting in his truck, the glow of his phone illuminating his face. The chief's unease grew stronger. Something was building, a confrontation as inevitable as the storm clouds gathering over the mountains. In storage room B, Eli knelt beside the Bobcat, checking its bandages. The animal's eyes were clearer now, more alert, and it watched him with an intelligence that made his heart ache. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I'm trying to do right by you. Just hang in there a little longer." Outside in his truck, Hayes finally put his phone away and stepped out into the snowy night. He'd made his choice. Tomorrow, everything would change. He only hoped he could live with the consequences. Roland stood at his window long after Hayes had gone inside, watching the snow fall and feeling the weight of decisions yet to come pressing down on his shoulders. Something was wrong in his firehouse, but he couldn't see all the pieces yet. He could only hope that when the truth finally emerged, they'd all be ready to face it. The night wrapped around the firehouse like a cold shroud. At 2:15 in the morning, the sudden crack of breaking glass shattered the silence. Roland jerked awake in his office chair, his instincts screaming danger before his mind fully registered why. Multiple shadows moved past windows. The emergency lights flickered, then died. Through the darkness, Roland caught the acrid smell of gasoline. Fire in the house. The cry came just as the first flames erupted along the eastern wall. Roland grabbed his radio, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All personnel, we have intruders. Station is under attack. This is not a drill." The sound of gunfire exploded through the garage bay. Bullets pinged off metal trucks and punctured equipment. Roland's heart pounded as he recognized what this was. The poachers had come for their evidence. "Everyone out. Move to safety positions," Roland commanded, but the crackle of flames was already drowning out his voice. Smoke began pouring through the ventilation system, thick and choking. Eli burst from his bunk room, coughing. His first thought wasn't of escape, it was of the injured Bobcat in storage room B. He started running toward it, but Hayes appeared. From nowhere, grabbing his arm. "Leave it," Hayes shouted, his face pale with guilt and fear. "The whole east wing is going up." Eli yanked free. "You knew about this." The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. "You told them where to find it." More gunshots rang out. Roland's voice boomed through the smoke. "Drummond, Hayes, get to the trucks." But Eli was already running toward storage room. B flames licked up the walls, and the heat was intense enough to make his skin feel tight. The Bobcat's frightened yowls drove him forward, even as burning debris rained down around him. Roland saw him go, and cursed. "Mitchell, Peterson, get the hoses. Carter, call 911. He started after Eli but had to dive behind a truck. As another burst of gunfire sprayed across the bay, the storage room door was hot to the touch. Eli kicked it open, choking on smoke. The Bobcat's carrier was knocked over, the animal pressing itself into the farthest corner. As Eli reached for it, a burning beam crashed down behind him, blocking the doorway. "Come on," he pleaded with the terrified creature. "Trust me, one more time." Outside, the battle for the station raged. Roland and his crew fought with everything they had, hoses targeting both flames and intruders, turning the freezing night into steam and chaos. But the poachers had come prepared. They drove the firefighters back with sustained gunfire, while the blaze ate through more of the building. "Where's Drummond?" Roland shouted over the roar of flames. Still inside, Carter yelled back, "East Wing." Roland's heart clenched. The East Wing was nearly fully involved now, its roof starting to sag. Without hesitation, he grabbed his breathing apparatus and charged back into his burning station. The smoke was impenetrable. Roland moved by memory and touch, calling out Eli's name. The heat was becoming unbearable, even through his gear. He could feel it trying to cook him alive. A crash from storage room B caught his attention. He found Eli trapped behind fallen debris, clutching the Bobcat's carrier. The young firefighter's face was streaked with soot, his eyes desperate. "Chief." Eli's voice was hoarse from smoke. "I couldn't leave it, I know, son." Roland began clearing a path. "I know." Together they made their way back through the inferno. Twice they had to change course as floors became too dangerous to cross. The Bobcat remained eerily quiet in its carrier, as if understanding that its life depended on their success. They emerged into the snowy night just as part of the roof collapsed. Roland's crew had pushed the poachers back, but the damage was done. Their beloved station was being devoured by flames that reached into the storm-dark sky. Eli set down the carrier and collapsed to his knees, coughing violently. The Bobcat watched, through the grate its eyes reflecting the destruction of its sanctuary. Roland put a hand on Eli's shoulder, his own lungs burning as he watched his station burn. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Far too late to catch the attackers. The poachers had vanished into the night, leaving behind a war zone of flames, bullet holes, and shattered safety. The crew gathered around their chief and the rookie who had risked everything to save one wounded animal. The fire continued to rage, consuming years of history and service. But as Roland looked at his men, some injured, all shaken, yet standing strong, he knew the most important things had survived. The Bobcat's quiet presence reminded them all what they had fought, for the simple truth that every life was worth protecting, even at the greatest cost. Through the smoke and steam, dawn began to break over Ashbrook. The night's battle was ending, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. The flames had transformed the firehouse into a hellscape. Roland stumbled through corridors he'd walked 10,000 times before, but now everything was foreign. And deadly, thick black smoke rolled along the ceiling, and the heat pressed against him like a living thing. Eli, his voice was muffled by his breathing apparatus. Drummond, report. No answer came through the crackling radio. The last time Roland had seen the rookie, Eli had been heading deeper into the building's east wing, determined to reach the storage room. Now that section of the station was completely engulfed. A violent explosion rocked the building, probably the fuel storage igniting. Roland staggered, catching himself against a wall that was hot enough to feel through his protective gear. The structural groans above told him the roof wouldn't hold much longer. Chief Carter's voice crackled through the radio. You've got to get out now. The whole thing's coming down. Roland pressed forward instead. His breath came in ragged gasps inside his mask as he searched desperately for any sign of his youngest firefighter. The smoke was so dense he could barely see 3 feet ahead. A figure suddenly burst through the smoke haze. Without any protective gear, his face streaked with soot and something that looked like tears. Chief, Hayes choked out. You can't. It's too late. They're gone. Roland grabbed Hayes' arm. What do you mean, gone? Where's Eli? But Hayes yanked away, backing up. The guilt in his eyes told Roland everything about the betrayal, about the price of it. Before Roland could stop him, Hayes turned and fled down the corridor, disappearing into the smoke. Hayes, Roland's shout echoed uselessly. Another traitor lost to the night. The building shuddered again. Roland forced himself onward, where he'd last seen Eli. The heat was incredible now, making his gear steam. Sweat poured down his face inside his mask. He found the storage room, or what was left of it. The ceiling had partially collapsed, and flames danced across every surface. There was no sign of Eli or the Bobcat's carrier, just burning debris and melted metal. No, Roland whispered. Please, no. The radio crackled again. Chief, get out. Now, that's an order. It was Peterson, his voice desperate. Roland stood frozen, staring at the inferno that had claimed his rookie. Eli had been right all along about the Bobcat, about Hayes, about everything, and Roland's stubborn pragmatism, his dismissal of the young man's compassion, had led to this. Images flashed through Roland's mind, Eli tending to the wounded Bobcat, refusing to give up on it, even when ordered away. The determination in the rookie's eyes when he'd discovered the animal's wounds. The pure conviction that saving one life mattered, no matter the cost. A massive crash from above snapped Roland back to reality. The roof was giving way. He stumbled backward as burning beams crashed down, sealing off the storage room completely. There was no hope now. No chance anyone could have survived in there. Roland's legs felt like lead as he finally turned away. The trip back through the burning station passed in a blur of smoke and regret. He emerged into the snowy night to find his crew battling the blaze from outside, their faces reflecting the same horror. He felt, "Where's Eli?" Peterson asked, rushing to help Roland with his gear. Roland couldn't speak. He just shook his head, dropping to his knees in the snow. The cold bit through his protective pants, but he barely felt it. The pain inside was far worse. The Bobcat, Carter's voice was small, already knowing the answer. Both gone, Roland managed to say. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Hayes too, he ran. He was working with them all along. The crew fell, silent. The only sound, the roar of flames and the hiss of water from their hoses. Roland watched his station burn, 30 years of service crumbling before his eyes. But it wasn't the building's destruction that broke something inside him. It was the loss of that young firefighter who had dared to show him a different way. I was wrong, Roland said, his voice cracking. Eli knew what mattered. He understood. What we're really here for. He pulled off his helmet, letting the icy wind blast his face. We don't just save the easy ones. We don't just follow protocol. We save them all, every life we can. The crew gathered around their chief, sharing in his grief as the station continued to burn. Roland's hand shook as he watched another section of roof cave in. Somewhere in that inferno lay the proof of his failure. A young man and a wounded animal who had deserved better from him. For the first time in years, since losing his wife, Roland felt tears freezing on his cheeks. He had spent so long building walls around his heart, convincing himself that emotional distance made him a better leader. Now those walls crumbled like his burning station, leaving him to face the cost of his choices. The Bobcat had come to them for sanctuary. Eli had fought to provide it. And Roland's hesitation, his rigid adherence to procedure, had failed them both. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of pale pink and gray. Smoke still curled from the ruins of the firehouse, rising to meet the morning clouds. The crew huddled near their trucks, shoulders slumped with exhaustion and defeat. Their faces were streaked with soot and frozen tears as they watched their home burn. Roland sat on the bumper of Engine 3, his head in his hands. The weight of failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. He'd lost not just a rookie, and an innocent creature, but his own way. Everything he'd believed about leadership felt hollow now. Chief Carter's voice cut through the morning stillness. Look, Roland lifted his head slowly, expecting nothing but more devastation. But what he saw made him stumble to his feet, his heart suddenly hammering in his chest. A figure was emerging from the tree line, moving slowly through the deep snow. Even at a distance, Roland recognized the lanky frame, though it moved with a pronounced limp, and there, padding carefully beside him through the snow, was a familiar shape with dappled fur. "It's Eli," Peterson whispered, and the Bobcat. The crew rushed forward, but Roland held up a hand, stopping them. Something about this moment felt sacred. They watched as Eli made his way across the snow-covered ground, one step at a time. As he drew closer, the extent of his ordeal became clear. His turnout gear was scorched and torn. Angry red burns marked the side of his face where his mask had partially failed. The Bobcat limped beside him, its fur singed, but its eyes alert and watchful. Neither looked defeated. If anything, they seemed stronger together. "I got her out through the back storage room window," Eli explained when he finally reached them, his voice hoarse from smoke. "We've been circling around through the woods, staying ahead of the poachers. Figured it wasn't safe to come back until daylight." Roland stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Eli, the words stuck in his throat. "The Bobcat saved my life, Chief," Eli continued quietly. "When the roof started coming down, she pushed me toward the window, like she knew." He looked down at the wild creature beside him with something like wonder. "Guess she decided to return the favor." The Bobcat sat in the snow, maintaining a careful distance from the other firefighters but staying close to Eli. Its presence was a testament to everything Eli had fought for, the worth of every life. The power of compassion over fear. "You were right," Roland finally managed to say. The words felt like releasing a weight he'd carried for years, about everything. "I was so focused on following protocol, on keeping emotional distance." He shook his head. "I forgot what we're really here for." Sir Eli looked confused. "True courage isn't about being hard or cold," Roland continued. "It's about caring enough to risk everything, like you did." He gestured to the Bobcat. "You showed me that." The morning light strengthened, revealing more details of the night's violence. Shell casings glinted in the snow. Scorch marks from accelerants marked deliberate paths of destruction. The poachers had left behind undeniable evidence of their attack. "Hayes?" Eli asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Ran?" Roland replied grimly. "His brother was with them. He set this all up." "We've got proof now," Peterson spoke. "Up. The attack on the station, the hunting camp, we found it's enough to bring them all down. Hayes included." The Bobcat suddenly tensed, its ears swiveling toward the trees. A moment later they heard the distant sound of approaching vehicles, state police and wildlife authorities, finally able to reach them through the storm-cleared roads. "What happens to her now?" Eli asked softly, looking at the Bobcat. Roland stepped forward and knelt carefully in the snow, meeting the wild creature's steady gaze. In those eyes, he saw everything he'd forgotten about why he'd become a firefighter in the first place. The pure drive to protect life, no matter how difficult or dangerous. "We do what you knew was right from the beginning," Roland said. "We make sure she's safe, get her wounds treated. Then we let her go home to our mountains." He stood, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. "After she helps us make sure Hayes and his brother's crew never hurt another animal again." The crew gathered around Eli and the Bobcat as the sun climbed higher, their shadows stretching long across the pristine snow. They were battered but unbroken. In the light of dawn, even the ruined firehouse seemed less like an end and more like a beginning. Through his pain and exhaustion, Roland felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the hard, pragmatic kind he'd hidden behind for so long, but something warmer and truer. Something that felt a lot like the compassion he'd seen in Eli's eyes that first night, when a wounded Bobcat had collapsed at their door and changed everything. 3 weeks after the attack on the firehouse, a small group of vehicles wound their way up the snowy mountain road. The winter sun glinted off the fresh powder, making the world sparkle like diamonds. In the lead truck, Roland glanced at Eli, who cradled a large carrier in his lap. Inside, the Bobcat stirred restlessly, sensing the familiar sense of home. News had spread quickly through Ashbrook after that violent night. State police had arrested the poachers within days, using evidence from both the burned station and the hunting cabin. Their network of illegal hunting and animal trafficking had finally been exposed. Hayes' involvement had shocked the community, though his resignation letter arrived before formal charges could be filed. He'd left town without a word, his betrayal a wound that would take time to heal. The Bobcat's recovery had been remarkable. The wildlife veterinarians had treated her wounds and nursed her back to health, amazed by her fighting spirit. Now, watching the creature's alertness as they approached the release site, Roland could hardly believe this was the same animal that had collapsed at their door that bitter January night. "This is the spot," Peterson called from the second truck. The small convoy pulled to a stop in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Fresh snow crunched under their boots as the firefighters gathered around Eli's truck. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of wilderness. Eli stepped carefully through the deep snow, holding the carrier steady. His burns had mostly healed, though a faint scar still traced his jawline. Roland watched his sure movements with pride. The rookie had become something more in those weeks. A leader in his own right, respected not just for his courage but for his unwavering compassion. You should do the honors, Chief Eli said, setting the carrier down in the snow. She changed everything for all of us, but especially for you. Roland nodded, understanding the truth in those words. He knelt beside the carrier, his hand steady as he reached for the latch. The Bobcat's eyes met his through the great knot, with fear or anger, but with a wild dignity that touched something deep in his soul. You ready to go home? He asked softly. The Bobcat chittered in response, as if understanding. With a quick motion, Roland opened the carrier door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Bobcat emerged slowly, her muscled form moving with liquid grace. She paused in the snow, testing the air, reacquainting herself with freedom. The firefighters stood in respectful silence, forming a loose semicircle. No one spoke, no one moved. They simply watched as this creature they had fought so hard to protect prepared to return to her world. The Bobcat took a few steps toward the tree line, then stopped. Slowly, deliberately, she turned back to face them. Her gaze swept across the group, lingering longest on Eli and Roland. In that moment, Roland felt the last of his old barriers crumble. We didn't just save her, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She saved us, saved me. He turned to face his crew. I'd forgotten what this job is really about. Got so caught up in protocols and procedures that I lost sight of why we do this in the first place. He gestured toward the Bobcat. Every life matters. Every act of compassion counts. She taught me that again. Eli stepped forward to stand beside him, and Roland saw in the younger man's eyes the same fierce dedication he'd shown that first night. But now, instead of seeing it as a challenge to his authority, Roland recognized it as the very essence of what made them firefighters. You're not a rookie anymore, Eli, Roland said, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're my brother. All of you are. He looked around at his crew. What we went through together, the fire, the fight, protecting her, it proved what really matters. We're family. The Bobcat watched them for a moment longer, her tail twitching in the cold air. Then, with fluid grace, she turned and bounded into the forest. They caught glimpses of her dappled fur between the trees, watching as she moved deeper into the wilderness until she vanished completely. The firefighters stood in silence, feeling the weight of the moment. So much had changed since that stormy night, when a wounded creature had sought their help. They had faced betrayal, violence, and fear, but they had also discovered strengths they never knew they had. Bonds deeper than they'd imagined possible. Roland looked at his crew, at his family, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun. In saving one life, they had found something precious. Their own humanity, their connection to each other, and the true meaning of courage. Let's go home, he said softly, and they turned back toward their trucks, leaving the pristine snow unmarked, except for the delicate prints of a Bobcat, heading home to her mountains. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.